I thought I'd just show some of the new things. But the request was that actually I cover some of the fundamentals. So that's what I'm going to do. It's a deep dive into fundamentals. So hopefully, if you're here and you know about FinOps already, you'll get something out of this because it's a deeper dive. But if you're not a FinOps guy, then hopefully you'll get something because it's covering some of the fundamental concepts that you need to understand if you want to use the warehouse module in F&O. And of course, if you get asked for feedback, please feel free to leave any suggestions for other topics that you think should be covered. And I'm sure Raz can find someone to do that if we ever do this again. Okay, so that's a bit of admin out of the way. So I thought I'd better introduce myself. So hello everyone, my name's Guy Terry. I'm an F&O consultant working in the UK for a partner. In terms of the warehouse module, like most F&O people, I'd never seen it before 2014. So that's when Microsoft released it into AX 2012. I worked on a couple of implementations in AX 2012, but then I had a kind of a lucky break when a customer purchased the Blue Horseshoe Advanced Warehouse module, which is an add-on that you could get for R3. And if you don't know who Blue Horseshoe are, well, they're the guys that originally wrote the warehouse module that Microsoft purchased and put into the standard product. So working with their consultants, I got a much deeper understanding of how you can use this product. Okay, so what are we covering today? So I've picked some topics. We're not going to get through them all because I already know that I'm struggling for time. So we're going to cover loads and shipments first. So what I've done is I've picked some topics that most warehouses I think would have some interaction with. So most warehouses you will find are responsible for receiving purchase orders, and most warehouses are shipping sales orders. And in terms of sales orders, then loads and shipments are always used, sometimes deliberately and purposefully, and sometimes they just get ignored. And on the inbound purchase order side, then you can also use loads. So we're going to cover those two. Then we're going to move on to something called waves, which is something you will use on the outbound side. And it leads into some new functionality I want to show, which is a neat way of building loads automatically if you're interested in that sort of thing. Before I get into that, I've got some slides on why you might want to use the warehouse module or why you might not. So obviously, if your organization doesn't trade physical items, then you probably don't have a warehouse or store or anything that could be construed as a warehouse. So if you're not trading physical items, you really have no need for the warehouse module. If you do trade physical items, there might still be some reasons why you might not use the warehouse module. So, for example, the first one there, if you don't use warehouse locations, so that means if you don't need to know exactly where everything is in your warehouse, perhaps you only have a small number of products and you know whereabouts in the store they all are, then you wouldn't necessarily need to use the warehouse module. If your business model is to ship everything to your customers directly from your suppliers, then obviously, although you're selling items, you don't have any stock in a warehouse of your own. So again, I wouldn't use the warehouse module in that scenario. And some organizations actually subcontract out their warehousing operations. Sometimes they use one of their carriers to offer a warehousing service. So if your carrier or another organization is responsible for your warehouse, then although you probably need to know how much of everything you've got, you don't need to know where it is, and you don't need to get involved in the ins and outs of picking sales orders. So for that reason, you probably wouldn't use the warehouse module. And the final reason, so the warehouse module ships with an app that you can get on Android and Windows, and it's designed to be run on touchscreen handheld devices. So it's very common in warehousing scenarios that if you're using the warehouse module, you're giving your employees one of these touchscreen devices, maybe just a tablet running a cheap version of Android, or more likely more like a barcode gun with a laser that reads the barcodes on the items that you're handling. Okay. So straight into the first topic, so loads and shipments. So when you're, especially on the outbound side, so outbound meaning items are leaving your warehouse, so typically going to a customer on a sales order, but also on if you're transferring them to another warehouse. So in this outbound scenario, the first thing you encounter is something called a load or something called a shipment. And these things get created before anything else happens in the warehouse module. There's some definitions there that I found online from various manuals. So what they're saying is a shipment can be one or multiple sales orders going to the same destination. So it's typically a delivery for the same customer, same destination, meaning an address. So if it's going to a single address, then it's probably for the customer at that address. So a shipment is a delivery to a single customer. And then a load is a group of sales orders, typically going out on a single truck, rail car, or other mode of delivery. So a load is larger than a shipment normally. It can contain multiple sales orders to multiple addresses and typically represents a single vehicle, single lorry. It's quite difficult to get pictures in lockdown, but I did find the Amazon delivery driver outside my house. So this is the back of his van on a particularly busy day. So if I was to map this to what we're talking about now, I would say that his van, the contents of his van, those packages in it make up the load, a single load. But the packages that are going to each house on his delivery round, they would be different shipments. So lots of shipments, one load. Okay, so I'm going to jump into F&O now. This is just a demo environment running standard Contoso data. And we're going to take a look, see what a load looks like. So I'm going to use the search bar. So in this environment, this organization has some loads created already. If I open up a load, then you can see the structure. So we have, it's a bit like a sales order. It has a header with some details related to the entire load. Remember, a load represents a vehicle. And then down here it has these things called load lines, which are the sales orders that will be shipped on this vehicle. So this has a sales order added to it already, but there's no way to add new lines to this load here. So if this was a sales order screen, you would see a button here saying add items or something. But this screen doesn't have a way to add lines to the load. And the way you would add sales orders to a load, if you were doing it manually, is to use something called the load planning workbench. So this is a manual way to add sales orders to loads. It can be useful if you only have a small number of sales orders, for example, that really require proper planning about how they'll get delivered. But it's not for everyone. And I'll show you another way to create loads later. So this load planning workbench, so as the title suggests, I am responsible for planning loads. That means I'm planning, in this case, our deliveries out of our warehouse. So I have some filters at the top to help restrict the information that I can see. This section here is about things that we could add to a load. So I can add, in this case, sales lines to a load. I can just as easily add purchase order lines. In this example, I'm going to pick sales lines. I've got a bunch of sales orders there. And then down the bottom are some loads that exist already. So it might be that you've part planned a vehicle and you want to add some more sales orders to it. These are the open loads that I potentially could add sales orders to. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to select these three lines here. So this is 2 sales orders, 3 sales order lines. And I'm just going to come up here and say add these 3 to a new load. So this part here, if I was a proper load planner and I was concerned about how much I could fit on the vehicle, then this is some information that's useful for that. I'm just going to stick past it for now. Okay, so now I have a new load. So here it is here, number 90. Status is open. Notice this is sorted by status. So this one is at the top. If I click on the load, so we have the 3 sales order lines have been added to that load. Just notice that the shipment ID is blank. I'll come back to that in a moment. As a load planner, once I've decided that this is the contents of that vehicle, then what I would do is hand that over to the warehouse, if you like. And the way we do that in F&O is we do something called a release. So release to warehouse, and that is handing over responsibility of fulfilling those sales orders and loading that vehicle to the guys in the warehouse who will actually do the work. Okay, so now that's done, I'm going to go back into the load. Notice it's now moved down here because it's now got a different status. And what we see now is that F&O has created some shipment IDs automatically. So remember, shipments are the individual deliveries on a vehicle. And in this case, we've got 2 shipment IDs. The reason being there's 2 customers, 2 delivery addresses. So these lines are 1 delivery, and this line here is a second delivery. So shipments, the shipment ID is always created by the release process. And in this example, we did the release from a load, but there are other ways. And in this example, we created the load first, then we create the shipment. There is a way to do it the other way around. So in that way, you are creating the shipment first and then later adding it to a load. I'm just going to show you that process. So I'm going to go to a sales order that someone has kindly already entered for me. Just going to pick this one here, and I'm going to hit the release process button here as I did earlier. So release always creates a shipment, as it says there. Let's go and have a look at that shipment. Okay, so I have a bunch of shipments in this environment, and this is my newest one. It's an outbound shipment because it's for a sales order, and it's got the 2 lines from that sales order that I selected on it. If I open it up, shipment is very much like a load in its construction. It has a header with some information on it, and it has some lines which are related to the sales orders which have been added to that shipment. And again, notice here that now I have a load ID, but the load ID is currently blank. So this shipment has been created. I've created a delivery, but I haven't assigned it to a load. So the next step in the life of a shipment is that it gets added to a wave, and which I'm going to cover in a moment, and that wave gets processed. So I'm just going to jump ahead into waves to do that, because wave processing is how F&O will add that shipment onto a load, and we'll come on to wave processing later. Okay, once that's done, if I jump back to my shipment and refresh. So what's happened now is that F&O has created a new load in this case, so a new vehicle, and has assigned that shipment to it. So hopefully that was a very quick summary of shipments and loads on the outbound side. Just for information, in the background, the lines that you see on a shipment and the lines that you see on a load are the same thing. So in F&O in the database, they are the same table. It just happens that if you create the load first, then you're creating load lines, and then later on, the load lines get a shipment ID. If you do it the other way around, you create a shipment first, you create the shipment lines, and then later on, those shipment lines get assigned to a load. Okay, loads can also be used on the inbound side. So inbound typically means receipt of a purchase order, can also be receipt of a transfer from another warehouse. So I'm going to run through how we can use loads on the inbound side. So in this case, I'm going to use a purchase order example, and I'm going to start again with that load planning workbench. So this time I'm planning the receipt of purchase orders into my warehouse. So the first thing I want to do is have a look to see which purchase order lines are open. That means they're not already assigned to a load. And down here, I'm just going to filter this list of existing loads to get rid of all the ones related to sales orders. Okay, so there aren't any. So in my job now, as someone who plans when purchase orders will be received, I can see here I've got this purchase order with 2 lines on it. It's supposed to come in on the, what's that, 2nd of June. I'm going to go ahead and add it to a load to indicate that these 2 lines are coming in on a vehicle, coming into this warehouse on a vehicle. Now, typically what warehouses like to do is, first of all, they like to make sure that they don't have all the vehicles turn up at once, because they've only got a certain number of doors that the vehicles can be unloaded against. And the second thing they like to do is they like to make sure that the vehicles don't turn up all at once, because they only have a certain number of people who can unload those vehicles and who can put the stock away. So they would like to spread that out so that it's much more manageable in the warehouse. So as a transport planner on this warehouse, what I can do is I can contact the supplier and ask what time he expects to arrive, or sometimes what happens is the supplier actually rings in to make a booking. Say, I've got to make a delivery on this date. I'm in the area at 10 o'clock. Can I book in for 10 o'clock? And the way we do that from the load planning workbench is, once we have our load with our purchase order lines on it, we make an appointment. Oh, I need to add both lines. Nearly missed that. So I'm going to select that second line and choose add an order to existing load. Okay, so now I have 2 lines on my load. So supplier rings in. I've got a delivery. Please can I make an appointment? I can look down, see that the ship carrier, see their name there. So in this case, it's the ship carrier called Truck Carrier. I can see that they've got a load coming in on that date, and I go ahead and open my appointment scheduling screen. So I'm going to create a new appointment. So time zone here gets a bit funny. So this warehouse is somewhere in the US. So the times we see in a moment get a bit funny, but I'm going to make an appointment, agree with the supplier that they can come in at 10 a.m. And all being well, they should be clear and unloaded by 11:30. There is other information I can put on there. I probably don't know that the tractor number is the vehicle reg, license plate, if you like. I don't know it yet, but I am going to put them onto bay door number 2, so that when they arrive, I can direct them to that door. Once the supplier and yourself are happy, I update the status of this appointment to firm. So that's now a firm appointment with my shipping carrier, that he will come in on this date with some items. We wait, we skip forward to the 2nd of June, and the lorry turns up at the warehouse. He rings the buzzer and he says, "Hi, I'm from Truck Carrier. I've got a delivery." I look down my list of open loads as maybe a warehouse admin guy. I see that I've got Truck Carrier, and I see that their appointment was, let me just refresh, it was 10 a.m. He's on time. I'm going to let him in, or maybe he's an hour early. I'm going to have to ask him to wait. Actually, in this case, we don't want to wait, because we're just going to let him in. So I go into my appointment scheduling. I say, yeah, I see your appointment. Please, can you pull up on bay 2? And then I'm going to hit this check-in button. And that just takes a timestamp in F&O of the time that the vehicle actually arrived. And that therefore opens up the possibility for supplier performance analysis, if you want to track how accurate they are at keeping their appointments. I've got some other information that I can fill in, but I actually don't know any of it at this time, so I'm just going to ignore that. So this is where the time zone comes in. It says he arrived at 3 a.m. Okay, fine. Okay, so the driver's now heading over to bay door number 2. I'm a warehouse admin guy. I'm not going to go and unload him, but there's someone stood behind me making a cup of tea, and I'm going to ask him to go and unload it. So what I might do in this situation is I might print out some paperwork and hand it to someone. The reason I might print paperwork is that they've got a barcode scanner and they want to scan things, because scanning things is easier than typing things. And if I give them a piece of paper, they've got a barcode on it that they can scan. Obviously, in the 21st century, we're trying to get away from using paper. So if you can get your suppliers to print barcodes, maybe of their purchase order number or the load ID, then that's all well and good. But in this case, I'm going to print this out. Say to the guy stood next to me, please go and unload this vehicle. That's what you can expect to find on it. So now I switch persona to the guy working in the warehouse. I've got a handheld device and I'm running the F&O warehouse app. So it's just an app that you can download. In this case, I'm from the Windows Store. It's actually this one here. So that's the full name of it. I've already got it installed, obviously. So I'm going into my user ID. So my user ID is something that we set up in F&O. And then it presents me with a menu. So the menu we get on the mobile app is completely customizable. So for the processes that your company operates, you can tailor it, and you can also tailor it so that different people, probably with different roles, get to see different things on that menu. In this case, I'm doing an inbound receipt, so I'm going to come in here and then I'm going to select the load receipt option. So one of the interesting things about the app is that it is completely designed for a touchscreen device, and it's designed for the fact that different devices have different screen sizes. So if I'm running on a small device, then I have tabs to see extra details. If I'm running it on a larger device, then those details are shown to me all the time. So the first thing it wants is the load ID. I can see that is down here, but I've got a piece of paper and I just scan it. Then it's asking for the first item. So I've unloaded the vehicle, and in front of me is a pallet of something. I go up to the pallet and I scan one of the barcodes on the item. And F&O retrieves the information. It says, well, it's from this PO. There should be one pallet, and in case you didn't know, that's 100 each. Is how many have you got? And I confirm that there is in fact one pallet. If I had, or if somebody in product maintenance had loaded a picture representing that item, then it would show here, and I could be doubly sure that I was receiving the right item. And now it's telling me what to do with that pallet that I've just registered, and it's saying that I should go and put it in a bulk area of the warehouse. This load had 2 items on it, so I scan the second pallet. Again, it's telling me that there should be one pallet. How many have I received? One pallet, confirm, happy days. And actually this one I'm getting instructions to go to a quality location, so probably there's some inspection process set up on this one. So once I've received all of the items off the vehicle, I'm happy with that. I can wander back to the office with my bit of paper and say to the admin guy, yeah, that's all fine, I've received that. As the admin guy, I'm just going to come in here and hit this confirm shipment button, confirm inbound shipment. So all that's going to do is it's going to check that he did in fact receive everything that we expected to be received on that load, and that he also didn't over receive something, because if you over receive something, there's a chance that you've counted one item as another type, another item. That's all gone through. So that's how you can use a load on inbound side. So it's completely optional on the inbound side. You don't have to use a load to receive a PO. You can just receive directly against the purchase order. But on the outbound side, regardless of whether you're actually paying attention to them, loads and shipments always get created. If you're not that fussed about planning your outbound transports, then you can ignore them. But if you need to plan your outbound shipments, then loads is the way that you do that. Okay, so why, given that they're optional, why might you use them? So on the inbound purchase order receipt, transfer order receipt side, you've seen that you can create appointments, and appointments are useful for planning the deliveries that you're receiving and making sure that you have enough doors available for the vehicles that you're expecting to turn up, and making sure that you are giving a nice steady stream of work to the people working in your inbound area. With a load on the inbound side, you also get this check-in, check-out option. I forgot to show you checkout. So check-in you can use to monitor your supplier against their appointments, and checkout you can use to, if you need to see how long it takes you to unload these vehicles. And then another reason why you might want to use a load on the inbound side is that you can add multiple POs to a single load. If the vehicle turning up will contain items from more than one purchase order. And the reason that's useful is that if you unload a vehicle and you're presented with all of the items on it and you don't know which purchase order each item came from, then typically you have to go and find the purchase order number before you can scan it and say, I received this item. If you've put those all onto a single load, then you can just scan the load ID and AX will find the purchase order that has that item. So it can be easier for the guys in the warehouse if they aren't hunting around to find which PO this particular item came in on. On the outbound side, loads are useful for transport planning. So especially if you have your own fleet of vehicles, so thinking about you make your own deliveries, you need to know how busy you are that day, how many vehicles you're going to need, and in that case, how many drivers you're going to need. So that can be useful for that. You can use appointments on the outbound side as well. So for example, if FedEx drop a lorry off every day and they come back at 3 p.m. Each day to pick that up, then you can create appointments for that. Another advantage of using a load is that you can create work for your warehouse guys load at a time. So you can say, right, now we're going to pick this vehicle, and then next we're going to pick that vehicle. On the outbound side, there's some functionality called anchoring. And the purpose of anchoring is to help you stage the items that you're picking into a specific area of the warehouse. So when I say stage, I mean I'm a warehouse guy who's gone to the shelf. I've picked up the pallet of Coke this customer has ordered, and I'm going to move it near the loading bay, but I'm not actually going to put it on a vehicle yet. That where we put it down near the loading bays is called a staging, and using anchoring we can direct all the items for the same vehicle to the same area in the warehouse, and items for a different vehicle to a different area, which helps with the loading process and making sure things go on the right vehicle. Another thing you can do with a load is that you can assign a load to a specific bay door. So you can, if vehicle that needs loading pulls up on bay door number 3, you assign that bay door to the load, and then all of the work that the warehouse guys are doing will be directed to door 3, so that they know that they are loading it onto the right vehicle. And finally, when you're shipping sales orders, typically you're printing out documentation for each customer, so a packing slip or a delivery note, but sometimes you might also need documentation for the whole vehicle, which you need to give to the shipping carrier. And if that's the case, then you can use something called a bill of lading, which you can create at a load level. And a final reason for using loads is if you're using the transport management module. I have to say I don't know anything about the transport management module, but if you were using it, you would be using loads. Okay, so earlier we saw how I used the load planning workbench to build a load. If you have thousands and thousands of sales orders going out every day, then that's just not possible or practical to assign every single one of those sales orders to a load. And we have a nice new feature in F&O for helping you build loads if you want that to happen automatically, but you still care about the loads that are being built. And that functionality is called, so it was called Advanced Load Building During a Wave. So this is it's not completely new, but it's still protected behind feature management. So that means it's not turned on by default. Because it's called load building during a wave, I actually need to explain the wave concept before I can show you how it works. So that's what I'm going to do next. Did I do a slide? Yeah, okay. So waves are only used in outbound scenarios, or more accurately, they are used when items need to be picked. So sales order and transfer order picking are two outbound scenarios where items need to be picked, but there's also production order picking. So that's where you're picking raw materials for moving them to the production area where they can get consumed on production orders. So these are the three scenarios that we use waves in. And the waves help you control when the picking will be done. So what does that mean? So earlier we saw a process called release to warehouse, and I said that is how you hand over the order or the load to the warehouse guys for picking. So if you let your sales team do the release of sales orders, then it could be that they are actually determining what your warehouse guys are doing. And if you don't want that to happen, then you can use this waves concept in between to give the warehouse more control over what they are doing rather than, for example, people in the sales office. So one thing we can do is we can ensure that shipments which need to be picked first are picked first. So that means, for example, if your urgent deliveries leave at 2 p.m. on a vehicle, you can arrange that all of your urgent shipments are picked first. And then after they're done, you can arrange that your standard shipments going out on a standard service can be picked later. It's also possible to use waves to manage the picking work for different areas of the warehouse. So some warehouses, you might have a big freezer area. You might have a limited number of people who can work in there. You might have a limited number of equipment that can work in there. And for that reason, it might take longer to pick the items out of the freezer than it does other items in other areas of the warehouse. So for that reason, you might want to start and release your picking work in the freezer before you release other types of picking work. So these are examples where you could use a wave to control when picking starts. So waves control when shipments get picked. So before I can show you a wave, I need to create some shipments. Remember, shipment is a delivery to a single customer address. The way I'm going to create a shipment this time is just to use the release function on a sales order. So the release function always creates a shipment. Which number am I going to use? Okay, so the first way I'm going to show you is how to create a wave manually, and then we'll explain how to create a wave automatically. If I create a wave manually, it helps to introduce the concept basically. So I've got these two sales orders here. Before I can create a wave, I need shipments. So I'm going to release these two sales orders. Don't be fooled, it says one shipment has been created, but it says it twice. So I have actually got two sales orders, two deliveries, two shipments. So if I go now and take a look at a wave. So these are waves that already exist. I'm just going to quickly go ahead and create a new one. So at the moment, this is a wave with nothing on it. it has a concept, like many things, of a header. So this is the wave header, and then here we have the lines of a wave, which in this case waves consist of shipments. So here we have the shipments that we can add, or actually we can't add. There is no way to add a shipment to a wave from this screen. The way we do that is we use this maintain shipments button. So what I've got here on this screen is some information about the size of the wave. So if it was important that about the amount of picking work that I release at one time, I would be paying attention to that. Here I have a section called shipments not on a wave. So these are the shipments that I could potentially add to this wave, and something down here about the contents of each shipment. So this shipment here has 2 lines, these items, and this shipment here has 2 lines, these items. Finally, at the bottom, it tells me the shipments I've already added to this wave. So if I go ahead and add one, the shipments disappears from here, and it appears down here. So here I am adding shipments to a wave, and the reason I'm adding shipments to a wave is that I want to be able to pick these shipments at the same time, so they're going on the same wave. Once I've done that, I go back to my wave screen, and then I can see that the 2 shipments have been added. And now if I wanted to pick these or release them for picking in the warehouse, I can press the process button, and that goes off and does some steps, which I'll show you in a moment. So that's a manual way to create a wave. I don't know of anybody who would do it that way, because we have automatic ways to create waves. And the automatic way to create waves is controlled by something called a wave template, which I need to spell correctly. So earlier I said the release process always creates a shipment. It actually does one other thing. It will create a shipment, and then it will try to find a wave template which it can, which the shipment matches. So when I say the shipment matches, I mean it has to be for the same warehouse. So this template here is for warehouse 51. So it could be used by shipments out of warehouse 51. And then we have this function up here where we can select different shipments with different properties. So for example, I can say shipments, this wave applies for shipments with a particular shipping carrier. So this is how the wave template is used to assign shipments, different shipments to different waves. So when we do the release process, it creates a shipment, and then it comes into these wave templates, and it tries to find one that it matches the shipment. And if it finds one, then it looks on the wave template to see what to do next. And these options here all are telling the release process what to do next. So this here allows it to add the shipment to a wave that's already got other shipments on it. This here allows it to automatically create a shipment, add it to a wave, and then process that wave all in one go. Remember, processing the wave is the bit that creates the picking instructions for the warehouse. And then down here, processing the wave does these actions here. I just need to take that one off. So once we have a wave and we have shipments on it, we process that wave to create the picking work, and the process function actually follows these steps here. So it validates that the wave is valid. I don't know how it does that. And then it creates the load. So we saw earlier that if you create the shipment first and then you process the wave, the shipment is assigned to a load, and that's how that happens here. And then finally, the last step that the process function does is it will create the work. So the creating the work is the creation of the instructions for the people in the warehouse. Over on the left are other things that I can have happen during wave processing. So one of them, for example, I can get it to create replenishments. But the one I'm interested in here is this one here called build loads. This is new, and it's added by the advanced load building during a wave function. So I just need to show that. Just come in here. So this functionality is quite new. It's this is a 10.0.10 environment. 10.0.11 came out 2 days ago. So this is a pretty new environment. And the way Microsoft are handling new functionality is they are protecting it behind something called feature management. So this means they can release new features without forcing those new features on everybody who runs F&O. Did I click the right option? Yes. Okay, so these are the features that are available to be enabled in this environment, and I'm going to look for one called load build. Okay, so this is the feature which is giving us this new functionality. So here you'll see it's called wave load building. So at some point its name changed. Some point recently the name changed to wave load building. So wave load building is configured like so many things in the warehouse module using a template. This is called a wave load building template. Because I'm a bit more time than I thought I would, I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, show you how you do that. So a wave load building template determines how this wave load building works. So what that means is it determines how these loads get created automatically. Now, in my example, I want to create loads for different vehicles, and the different vehicles I'm going to say are vehicles run by different shipping carriers. So I'm going to have maybe UPS turn up with a vehicle, maybe FedEx turn up with a vehicle, and I want to create different loads for those vehicles. So I'm going to call it by carrier. Wave step code I'll come back to in a moment. Again, so this load template ID is a way of defining how big that vehicle is, how much you can fit on it, what's the maximum weight allowed. I'll skip over equipment because I've no idea what it does. I've never seen equipment concept in the warehouse module. Load mix group ID. So this is about how we can ensure that different items or different types of item are put on different loads. So for example, if I don't know, if you have a vehicle which is with a chiller, then you could say that I only want my chilled items to go on chilled loads and all my other items can go on other loads. Here we have a drop down which allows me to essentially allows me to add shipments to loads that have already been created, which I want to do in this case. This here allows the functionality to create a new load, and then we have something about whether we should split shipments across vehicles. That's all pretty straightforward. The bit I haven't done so far is tell it how I want to break or define my which shipment goes on to which load. And this is a little bit technical the way you have to do this. I have to hit this edit query button, and I have to define something called sorting. So the way I can try to hope that this makes sense is that if you think about a wave has shipments on it. It could have lots of shipments, and this process is trying to find which load each of those shipments should go on. And the way it does it is it sorts them in order. So if I've got 100 shipments, it sorts them in order that I set here. So first thing I'm going to set is something called ready to ship. So this is the ship date. So the first thing I'm doing is sorting my shipments in the date that they're going to leave my warehouse, which means the ones that are going to leave first at the top, and the ones that are not leaving for a couple of weeks will be at the bottom. The second thing I'm going to do then is sort by the ship carrier. So whether it's going to be a FedEx or a UPS is the ship carrier. And I do that by setting this. So what that's going to do now is when it gets presented with a list of shipments, it's going to sort them into date and carrier order. And the reason that's useful is that it knows that the first shipments will be for the same date and the same carrier, so it can put them on one load. And then when it sees that there's some shipments coming through for a different carrier, it can put them on a different load, and it'll keep going until it's got through all of the shipments that were on that wave. So that's why it uses sorting, and this is the break by is how we define when to create a new load. So now that's configured, I need to go back to my wave template and enable it. So I enable the wave load building function by adding this build load method from the left over here to the selected methods on the right. And when I do that, F&O knows that this needs to appear number 2 in the sequence, and it's reminding me at the top that a wave step code is mandatory. So the wave step code I typed in earlier on the wave template and was called by carrier. So these need to match. So this is a way of saying to the wave template which of those wave load build templates should I use. And once we've configured that, I just need to go ahead and show that it works, I suppose. So I've got some sales orders ready. It's quite a few actually, so it's these ones here. I'm going to head select all those. So there's a nice mix here. I've got some going out tomorrow and some going out today, some on FedEx and some on UPS. So what I'm hoping for is a load for the FedEx lorry today, a load for the UPS lorry today, and 2 loads for those lorries tomorrow. So I'm going to use the release process, so that will create a shipment. It will try and find a wave template. It will find a wave template. It will see the wave template says to use the wave load build feature, and it will create some loads. It's actually done loads of things, 28 different things. Let's go and see if we got the loads that we were hoping for. Okay, so I've got these are my new loads here. So I've got 1 going out on the 30th with UPS, 1 going out on the 30th with FedEx, and then the same for tomorrow for the sales orders that are going out tomorrow. Just go take a look. So here we've got 2 different shipments. That means 2 different deliveries, 2 different sales orders on that vehicle. And then we've got on one of tomorrow's vehicles, 2 different shipments, 2 different sales orders, 2 different deliveries. So that's a nice feature if you do want loads, and they are important, and it's important that they do represent the vehicles that you're shipping out. That's a nice way to create those loads without having to do it manually. Of course, if you don't care about sort of constructing the outbound vehicles in F&O, then you can just ignore loads. But if you do care about them, then this is a really nice feature. And that is the end of what I planned to cover, and actually managed to get through it quicker than I thought, so that's really good. So I don't know, Raz, has there been any questions or anything? Are you still there? Let's have a look. Okay, just the first one is about why am I not using PowerPoint? I'm not using PowerPoint. I'm using something called Sway, which is it's still a Microsoft tool, but it allows you to create a presentation out of a Word document, which is I think is really nice because I like writing in Word documents. Once you've created your Word document, you present it to Sway, and Sway goes ahead and turns it into a presentation. Okay, so I've got a question there. If you're waiving manually, the sales order lines must be reserved first. So you don't, let me think. I would say that to create a shipment, the sales order line must be reserved first. So in that case, yes, if you're creating the wave manually and adding shipments to it, the order lines must be reserved. So someone's asking about the mobile app and about support for physical device buttons. To be honest, I've never worked in a warehouse and I've never used the app in anger, but I have seen this come up before, that some of the functions on the app do not map to a keyboard button, which can make it difficult for people who are wearing gloves in a freezer, for example. So yes, you are correct, Mohammed. Some functions in the app do not map to a keyboard. Microsoft know, maybe they'll do something about that. Another question coming, can we consolidate shipments automatically? So yes, you can. There's some simple functionality that's been around for a while to consolidate shipments for the same delivery address, but that only really worked if the orders were released at the same time. Let me just quickly show you that button. What? That's not what I wanted. So one of the options on the warehouse allowed it to consolidate shipments at release to warehouse. So that only worked if the sales orders were for the same address and they were released at the same time. There is a new functionality out now. It's called consolidate shipment. There it is. It's not switched on in this environment, but this one allows you to consolidate shipments much in a similar way. Consolidate sales orders onto shipments in a similar way that I was consolidating shipments onto loads. Can we remove license plate completely? So license plate is something that happens when you start using the warehouse management functionality. It just sort of gets enabled, and in certain processes it's mandatory. So for example, in purchase order receiving, you cannot receive a purchase order without creating a license plate. However, there are ways that you can effectively ignore license plates. So the way you do that is by using non-license plate controlled locations where you can. So for example, in the purchase order receipt scenario, you can receive the purchase order onto a license plate and then have the put away work immediately move it to a non-license plate controlled location, and in that way AX can temporarily generate a license plate which is then discarded. When will the system check inventory during load creation? So is that about whether the vehicle has capacity for all the items you're adding to it, or is that about whether there is stock for the line that you're adding? So let's assume it's about reservations. Yes, okay. So you can create a load and add sales order lines to it, even if there is no stock. So as long as you're not using the release process to create the load, then it doesn't matter whether there's stock. So that means you're probably looking at using the load planning workbench. So it means you can plan your loads out in front before the stock being available in the warehouse. Advanced load build, yes, because it relies on the release process. So the question is, advanced load build, the sales order lines must be reserved first, and the answer is yes, because it relies on the release process, the order lines must be reserved. Question from Johan. For receiving process, does the system take into consideration the actual item dimensions? Odd shape. So this is about items that are of an irregular shape. Where the item will be placed into. So I assume that means in a location in the warehouse. So odd shaped items are not really. So if you're using volumetrics on your put away, you can define the size of a location, and then you define the size of the items and how much, and you can work out how many of those items can fit into a location. And it doesn't particularly take into account odd shaped items. It just takes into account the volume of the location and the dimensions and the quantity of the item that you're putting in it. Can we check credit limit at time of packing a shipment? Not that I know of. So you've got a credit check at release, and I'm the only one I know of after that, or the next one I know of after that would be at the time of packing slip. Maybe that's what you mean. But there's also a step called confirm shipment before packing slip, which doesn't, as far as I know, do a credit limit check. And if there are no more questions, I don't know, maybe we finished 2 minutes early.
Well, thank you again, Guy, for a very concise session. I have to say, I think we're all very impressed. You've covered the ground very well, and Lots of fantastic questions from the community, and I think you've again addressed all of those questions. So I just want to say thank you so much for obviously for your session. Please, 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 everybody get in touch with Guy. It is a niche area still. It is an acquisition of Microsoft's, and it's still a green area where there needs to be a lot more learning and adoption on. So please contact Guy. If you need to connect with him, please feel free to do so. Guy, if you've already missed Guy's contact details, Guy, if you feel free to add them in the chat window, whether it's your email or your social media, just so people can connect with you, really. That would be really good. I think. But look, thanks again, Guy. Really good session. Really, really good. Very concise. Very impressive. So yeah. So you've obviously